TV side edition. Okay. All right. Okay, so a couple weeks ago we began the series of going through each mitzvah in halacha and opinions. So the first mitzvah we did then was the mitzvah peruvu, which is mitzvah number 1 according to the counting of the chinuch. It goes based on the parsha. So I figured if we started, we have this copies of it? Yeah, sure. So I figured if we started with the chinuch, so we'll go with that. We'll see what happens, So the next mitzvah according to the chinuch is mitzvah Bris Milah. So that's what we're going to learn about tonight a little bit, the mitzvah Bris Milah. So, again, like I mentioned already, I think it was, I can't remember what year it was, but it happens that whenever you're learning something and it just coincides with the parsha that you're learning, it's a siman that the learning is good. It's l'shem shemayim. So it just so happens to be we're not in Parshas Lech, we're Parshas Ve'era. But the sugi that we're going to learn in Bris Milah, and it wasn't on purpose, just it works out. It's really more Parshas Ve'era related than Parshas Lech, as we'll see. Okay, let's begin like this. So I mentioned last time when we did the first mitzvah that there is a tradition that we have, going back to the Goyim already, that we have 613 mitzvahs, and then you have an additional 7 mitzvahs, which are the main mitzvahs midrabanan, right? Chanukah and Purim and Natil Sedayim and Erevin and so on. 7 mitzvahs that are midrabanan. So 613 plus 7 is 620. The gematria keser, it's the keser of Torah. That's the wholeness of Torah is 620 mitzvahs altogether, and we also have 620 letters in the Aseret Sedivros. So there's a tradition based on that every single one of the letters of the Aseret Sedivros is going to correspond to one of the 613 plus the additional 7. So again, if last week we're going with the order of the chinuch, so last week was peruvu, it's mitzvah number 1, that's going to correspond to the aleph of Anoichi, right? Mitzvah number 2, Bris Milah, that's going to correspond to the nun of Anoichi, right? Aleph nun Anoichi. So the letter nun. So we have to investigate that. I guess that's question number 1. What is the relationship between the letter nun and the mitzvah Bris Milah? The truth is, there's a Gemara in Shabbos where it talks about all the letters of the Aleph Beis, what they represent, and so on. And so the letter Nun, the Gemara says, there's a regular Nun, and there's an end Nun. Nun Seifis, Nun Pashat, Nun Kafaf, and Nun Pashat, a bent Nun, that's the regular Nun, and Nun Pashat, the elongated Nun. So the Gemara says that the letter Nun is connected to the word Neman, which means a person that's trusted, a faithful person. Neman Kafuf, Neman Pashat, says the Gemara in Shabbos. The letter Nun corresponds to a tzaddik that's considered to be an ish Neman. Sometimes it's in a situation his Neman is his faithfulness to Hashem manifests itself in his humility, Neman Kafuf, and sometimes it manifests itself in his honesty and openness. That's the Nun Pashat, the open Nun. But the tzaddik that we think of when we talk about the word Neman, who in Tanakh does the Rebbeinu Shalom describe as a person that's trusted? That's Moshe Rabeinu, right? So again, the letter Nun, which is the second letter of Aseret Sedivros. And so we have a few more copies. We have enough? Yeah? So the second letter of the Aseret Sedivros, which is going to correspond to the second mitzvah, which is Bris Milah, the letter Nun, is connected to Moshe Rabeinu. So right away, we should therefore have a connection between Bris Milah and Moshe Rabeinu. Now the truth is we do. For example, in Parshas Shemais, in Parshas Shemais, no. Is it Shemais or Ve'era? Ve'era? Maybe. When Moshe Rabeinu was sent to, a few weeks, it's okay not to remember. So when it's in Shemais, So Moshe Rabeinu was sent to Parai to speak to him, so we know to take Klal Yisrael out, which is really Moshe Rabeinu, embracing his role as Moshe Rabeinu. So, as we know, the story, it's a Peled Gemaisa, but the pasuk says that on his way to Mitzrayim, so he thought that it would be more appropriate to perform that mitzvah of Yitzias Mitzrayim than the Bris Milah on his own son, which could be pushed off. But we know that his life was in danger because of that. He cannot be Moshe Rabeinu as the redeemer of the Jewish people unless he completes the mitzvah of Bris Milah. So you see such a thing that Moshe Rabeinu and Bris Milah are connected to each other, but a little bit more of a direct point of connection. If you take a look at the first Marmaka, so this is from a Sefer Oitzer HaChaim, it's from the Kamarna. So this is the last few lines that he writes on the mitzvah of Bris Milah. So again, it's a Sefer that he wrote on every one of the 613, Al Pi Kabbalah, Al Pi Side. So he writes the following thing. We know that when it comes to Bris Milah, so we know that Eliyahu Hanavi comes to every bris. Listen to what he says. So by a bris, you're supposed to say, right? That's what the Moyal says. This is the kisei shel yo. This is the seat for Eliyahu Hanavi. Because maybe be zeicha by that particular bris that Eliyahu Hanavi himself will come. Why? So he says like this. I don't know where he doesn't need a source for these inyanim, but I've never seen this anywhere else. But he says, "Ke'elyo ba'atzmai einay ba el lemi sheyesh b'nitzitz Moshe Rabeinu." Said the Kamarna, Eliyahu Hanavi himself, whatever that means, the totality of Eliyahu Hanavi, not maybe in a revealed way, but in the neshama, whatever that dimension of Eliyahu Hanavi comes to a bris only for a bris that the person that's by the bris has a nitzitz, a spark of Moshe Rabeinu. Again, I don't know if he means the baby, he means the Bali bris, someone in the shul, I don't know. But there has to be a Moshe Rabeinu Dikiyid in that place for Eliyahu Hanavi himself to come. Ulashar, if there's no Moshe Rabeinu Dikiyid in that place, Shalech Netzutze Ayraisa, then a spark of Eliyahu Hanavi visits the bris. But it's not Eliyahu Hanavi himself. There's always going to be a spark of Eliyahu Hanavi that's worthy of coming to a bris. But Eliyahu Hanavi totality only comes to a bris that Moshe Rabeinu is there. Okay, so already we see such a thing that there's a connection between Bris Milah and Moshe Rabeinu. That's the letter Nun, Neman Kafaf, Neman Pashat. That's Moshe Rabeinu. Okay, so we have to figure this out. What does Moshe Rabeinu have to do with Bris Milah? Okay, so the way to do this, we're gonna investigate the halacha of Bris Milah, some halachas about Bris Milah. We'll see where that takes us. So let's begin like this. Marmukah number 2. It says the Gemara Numa on Chav Ches Beis. The Gemara says as follows: the Tanya. It's the Gemara Numa. It's also Gemara Psachim. The Gemara says like this. We have a brisa. It says in pasuk of Yom Hashmini Yimol B'sar Lasai that on the 8th day you have a mitzvah. The father has a mitzvah to give a bris milah for his son, and so on the 8th day. Malamid. Well, the pasuk just says the 8th day. Malamid Shakol Hayom L'Milah. That the whole day is kosher to do a bris milah. It doesn't have to be dafka any particular time. It says the 8th day. So you do it the 8th day. Ela shazrizim makdim l'mitzvahs. But you should do it as early as possible because we know the general rule: zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs. Shenamar, and says the Gemara. And how do I know zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs? Says the pasuk in this week's parsha when Avraham Avinu was told about the mitzvah of Akedas Yitzchak, which is not a mitzvah forever, but it was a mitzvah for him. It says in pasuk v'yashkim Avram b'boker v'yachvash chamayr. That Avraham Avinu gets up and he prepares himself to go right away in the morning. Why in the morning? Why not in the middle of the day? Zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs. So says the Gemara. So you see such an idea as Zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs. So too by Bris Milah. Bris Milah can be done the whole day. But l'maisa, you should do it as early as possible. Zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs. Okay. Now, throughout Shas, we find this idea, this concept of Zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs, and it applies to everything. Every mitzvah that a person does, there's a mile of Zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs. So the question is, and the Mefarshim asks this: why does the Gemara? Why is this brisa? This is the source of Zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs. And in the world of Tanoim, this is the brisa that introduces us to the idea of Zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs. Now, Chazal understood that this is a principle that applies to everywhere. But the brisa goes out of its way to mention Zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs specifically when it comes to Bris Milah. It says in pasuk again, B'yom Hashmini Yimol, the Bris Milah should be done the 8th day. Zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs. Why? Because of Akedas Yitzchak. The source is Akedas Yitzchak. That applies to Kol Torah Kula. So the brisa could have used that as, he could have given any mitzvah as an example of that. There's a mitzvah to, to put a mezuzah on your door. So you could do it any time. Do it as soon as possible. Whatever. So why dafka Bris Milah? Why dafka Bris Milah is the example that is given for Zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs. So it's like this.
How many other mitzvahs do you have that have such an elongated time span to the answer?
I'm sure when you go through the list of 613, you could find them. From Stama, you could find mitzvahs that don't necessarily. Anytime there's a mitzvah, Zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs. B'dikas chametz. Yeah, many mitzvahs. It doesn't. There's a beginning point, but doesn't. You could keep on going. It doesn't have to be Kiddush Friday night. There's many mitzvahs that we have open. A certain time where it begins. And it's using the mitzvahs. But Dafka Bris Milah is the one that's being used as the as the example, the prime example of it. Okay, so if you take a look at Marmukah number 3, the Rambam, there's 2 Rambams where he talks about Zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs. Okay, we'll see how it goes. Number 3 is the Rambam in Hilchas Meiser Karbanos. Okay, the Rambam over here is talking about general avodas hakarbanos, general mitzvahs that we have when it comes to sacrifices. So says the Rambam, for example, Kol hayom kosher l'smicha. Right, one of the things that mitzvahs that you have to do when it comes to a carbon is smicha, to lean on the animal before the sacrifice begins. That can be done the whole day. Shchita can be done the whole day. Malika, for killing the bird for a carbon, can be done all day. Lahaktara, again, burning on mizbeach all day. Lahagasha, ulazoya, all different processes in carbonis. It can be done all day long. V'afal pikein, says the Rambam, zriz magdilim mitzvahs. Okay, but you should do it, zriz, you should do it as early as possible. Okay. Now, Marmukah number 4, the Rambam in Hilchas Milah also tells us zriz magdilim mitzvahs. But listen how the Rambam says it. He says it much starker than he says it than he mentioned it in other places. In Hilchas Milah, says the Rambam, Ein malam la'olam ela b'yoyim achar le'sashach. We know that when it comes to the 8th day, and even weiter, the mitzvah of Bris Milah should be done during the day, from Elis Shachar and on. V'chol hayom kosher l'milah. So far, it's the same language as the halach when it came to karbanas. The whole day you could do a Bris Milah, v'afal pikein, but nevertheless, now again, let's bear in mind. So in the previous Rambam, the Rambam ended off very simply with 3 words: afal pikein, zrizim, magdilim mitzvahs. Another Rambam adds in, afal pikein, mitzvah lahaktim b'tchilas hayom. It's a mitzvah to do the Bris Milah in the beginning of the day. Zrizim, magdilim mitzvahs. So the Rambam, again, he's very careful with his words. The Rambam didn't just end off the same way he did when he mentioned zrizim, magdilim mitzvahs when it comes to karbanis and other mitzvahs, which is zrizim, magdilim mitzvahs. That's the language that we're familiar with. The Rambam wasn't satisfied with just saying that. The Rambam had to add these few words. Mitzvah lahaktim etchilas hayom. Why is the Rambam adding those words? So here's the nakuda. Here's the point. What the Rambam is trying to tell us is the following idea. Whenever we understand there's an idea of zrizim mitzvahs, right? To do mitzvahs early, to do mitzvahs quickly. Now, generally speaking, that idea of doing mitzvahs bezrizas is a milah in the person. In other words, let's say there's 2 mitzvahs that they have, two people have to perform the same mitzvah. Let's say the example the Rambam gave before Shechita. You have to sacrifice, Reuven has to sacrifice a carbon, and Shimon has to sacrifice a carbon. Reuven is quick, he's a zariz, he does it quickly, and Shimon is a little bit lazy. Is the carbon of Reuven better than the carbon of Shimon? Pashtus not. Pashtus is not. Most Achronim say not like that. It's a mile in Reuven. Reuven gets more schar. Reuven shows himself to be someone that's more dedicated to mitzvahs. It's a mile in the person. The mitzvah itself is unaffected by as long as you do it in the proper time frame of when it's kosher. The fact that you did it early, you did it late, it says something about you, but it doesn't affect the mitzvah itself. That's true with all mitzvahs except for Bris Milah. When it comes to Bris Milah, it's not just the fact that when a Bris Milah is done early, it shows an alacrity, it shows a chashivas in you that, see, you're dedicated to mitzvahs and you're a good guy, you're not lazy. That's true. But also the mitzvah of Bris Milah demands that. The mitzvah of Bris Milah demands that. You have 2 brisim, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven's performing a bris, and Shimon's performing a bris. Reuven performs a bezrizis, and Shimon performs it a little bit later in the day. It's still within the day, so it's yaitz, everything's fine, but it's not bezrizis. No longer is it just a mile in Reuven. It's now a mile in the bris itself. The mitzvah was performed better. The mitzvah is a better mitzvah. This is what the Rambam is trying to add when he adds those lines, those words in Marmukah number 4, that he says again, Bris Milah can be done all day. Afal pikein. He doesn't just say zrizim magdilim mitzvahs, because that all those words mean is that you're a good guy for doing that. The Rambam doesn't say that. The Rambam says mitzvah lahaktim t'chilas hayom. It's a mitzvah within Bris Milah. It's one of the details of Bris Milah that it should be done early. It's a mile in Bris Milah. This is why, again, going back to the Brisa in Marmukah number 2, the source of zrizim magdilim mitzvahs is Akedas Yitzchak. But the Brisa could have picked any mitzvah as an example, or many mitzvahs as an example of showing zrizim magdilim mitzvahs. It goes out of its way to say Bris Milah, to use that as an example. Why? Because there's something unique about Bris Milah. It's not just a mile in the person. The mitzvah itself is better. By the way, this answers a bunch of questions that the Achronim raise. I'll give you an example. There's a Mishnah in Maseches Megillah. The Mishnah goes through a whole bunch of mitzvahs which are kosher during the day, the whole day, and mitzvahs which are kosher at night. So it goes a whole list. The Achronim ask, the Aruch HaShulchan and other Achronim ask that Bris Milah is not in there. It's not in there. Bris Milah is a mitzvah which is a daytime mitzvah. So it should be listed in the Mishnah over there, listing all daytime mitzvahs. But Milah is not there. Everything else is not Milah. Why? The answer is that, of course, it's true that a Milah is kosher throughout the whole day. But really, it should be done early. Well, what do you mean? Every mitzvah should be done early. No. Every mitzvah, as far as the mitzvah is concerned, it doesn't make a difference if it's done early or not. It matters to you, the person. But the mitzvah itself doesn't care when it's done as long as it's done in the day. Milah cares that it should be done during the day. The mitzvah of Milah demands that it should be done early and not late. So it's a different category. It's technically kosher the whole day, but it's not the same as every other mitzvah which is kosher the whole day. It itself, lechatchila, has to be done early. I'll give you another example. The halacha is that a Milah, is Deicha Shabbos, right? So you do a Bris Milah even on Shabbos too. But if Milah is Shloi B'Zmano, let's say you have a baby that wasn't able to have a bris on the 8th day, so it's the 9th day, 10th day, whatever, months later, whatever the situation is, so that's not Deicha Shabbos. It's not Deicha Shabbos anymore. It's not Deicha Yontif. The Rambam Paskins, though, it is Deicha Yontif Sheni. Yontif Sheni it will. So Chaim Brisker famously asked, I don't get it. Once you're holding past the 8th day, then the difference of whether you do it today or tomorrow is just a matter of Zrizim Magdim Mitzvahs, if you think about it. Like the 8th day, we understand the mitzvah should be done on the 8th day. Fine. But once you're past the 8th day and you're holding 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, then what's the difference if I push it off till the next day, the following day? Chesaron and Zrizis. Where do we find that Zrizim Magdim Mitzvahs is so strong that it should push off Yontif Sheni Shalgoyas?
With the risk of kares.
No, so there's not going to be kares as long as it's done.
Maybe he doesn't make it.
If you're not able to do it because of Yontif, then it's not going to be a kares. It's not going to be a kares on the baby. It won't be kares on the parent. It won't have an issue. The question is, right now, why should the mile of Zrizas be so severe that it should override Yontif? Well, the answer is, again, based on this, Zrizas is not just a nice thing when it comes to Bris Milah. The Milah is better when it's done Bizrizas. The Milah is better when it's done Bizrizas. It's not just a matter of like, okay, listen, it'll be the same today or tomorrow. Maybe I'm not being a czar. No. The Milah is better when it's done Bizrizas. Ad kedei kach, that you should push off even Yontif Sheni. So that's the idea. Okay. So far, so good? Okay. The question is why? Why? What's so significant about what's unique to Bris Milah that Zrizis is a Milah in Bris Milah itself? Like what's the Indian? So take a look at Maramaka number 5. So the Meiri in Maseches Yuma, so he basically talks about this as well in terms of the relationship between Milah and Zrizis. And listen to how he puts it. Again, first he quotes the brisa that we saw before, that Kol Yom Kosher Milah, right? The Milah could be done the whole day. Shenamar Ubiyom Hashmini, it says just do it the 8th day, and so on. Umikol Mokim Roy Lizrizim Lahaktim Bavashachris, but says the Meiri, but certainly for Zrizis you should do it in the morning. Now he says why, and this says the Meiri. This is what makes Milah unique as opposed to other mitzvahs. Shlo Yira Kimisrashel Ba Mitzad Chamlasei Al Benoi. Says the Meiri, every other mitzvah, if you happen to delay it and push it off, all it indicates is that you're lazy. That's all it says. But your laziness isn't making a statement about the mitzvah. So if a person, again, whatever the mitzvah is, a person has to make Kiddush Friday night. So you enjoy it around, you're not making Kiddush early. No one's going to think that that's giving Kiddush a bad name. You're lazy, so you're lazy. But when it comes to Bris Milah, if a person is lazy about Bris Milah, then it doesn't just say that you're lazy. It might be indicating that there's something cruel about Bris Milah, and that's what's keeping you hesitant about doing it. Says the Meiri, Shlayir Kimisrashal, we don't want it to be seen. We don't want to give Milah a bad name and a reputation of something that's cruel and something that even Yidden don't really like doing because of the barbarity of it and so on, because you love your son so much. So says the Meiri, when it comes to Bris Milah, what's unique about the requirement of Zrizas is because if you're not a Zaris and you allow the Bris Milah to be pushed off, then that causes Bris Milah to there's a negative impression and a negative association that might then be made to Bris Milah itself, that this is something that people want to push off. Because there's a certain, because again, people can say negative things about it. So every other mitzvah, the fact that the person is not a zaris, it doesn't rub off there's no negative connotations that's given to the mitzvah itself. All of a sudden by Bris Milah, it's not like that. So the way the Meiri is explaining is that, let's just to pinpoint the Nakuda that the Meiri is revealing to us, is that it's not so much that there's something about Bris Milah that should be done early. It's just that if you push it off, it might create a negativity. It might again, it might not be your intention, but it could be giving off a negative impression and so on, a negative attitude towards Bris Milah. So that's the Nakuda. That's the Nakuda, says the Meiri. So it's not so much that there's something about Bris Milah that needs to be done quickly, but if you don't do it quickly and you allow it to push it off, then there's a certain reputation that you might be giving to Bris Milah, which is inappropriate. And so that's the Meiri says. Okay. So let me show you another Rishon that makes this point. You'll see how Halacha L'maaseh actually comes to play.
Just another element of
it's an explanation of this svar. We'll see soon. But that's how the Meiri is. That's the svar of the Meiri. Which again, to be clear, the Meiri. Whenever listen, if you're not a zaras and you do things late, then there's two things: it's not early and it's late. Right? So the Meiri is focusing on the fact that when a Milah is done, it's not so much that Milah should be done early. It's not so much early. The point is, but if you allow it to be late, then there's a negative connotation that Milah might, and a negative reputation that Milah might get because of the fact that you're not doing it early, you're pushing it off. Take a look at Maramok number 6, the Arzarua. Okay, it's one of the Rishonim, the Arzarua. The Arzarua is dealing with a question that many Rishonim dealt with, which is what happens when you have a Bris Milah on Rosh Hashanah. So on Rosh Hashanah, as we know, there's the regular davening, which again, so you have every time there's a Bris Milah, so it's usually after Shachris. But when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, so there's after Shachris, fine. But then there's the mitzvah of Shofar. So when you have two mitzvahs in front of you, you have Shofar, right? And you have Bris Milah. So which one comes first? It's a question the Rishonim dealt with. So let's think for ourselves. What would we do? So we have basic rules and regulations in place for these types of situations. Whenever you have two mitzvahs in front of you, which one comes first? So tader v'shena tader kaidem. Okay, which one is more tader? Shofar or Milah? Could be every day, but it's usually not every day. Okay, so you got it. Okay, so this is the thing. The Ga'inim held the following way. The Ga'inim held that theoretically Shofar should be considered more tadir than Milah. Why? Because even though it's true, Shofar is only once a year, and Milah could be every single day of the year. But it also could not be every single day of the year. The consistency of Shofar, although it's a one-time deal, but it's consistent, that makes it more tadir than a mitzvah which doesn't have that consistency, which could be many times, but it could also be never. So the Rishonim understood this idea. Again, we're not going into this right now, but this is just to explain like where they're coming from. That off the bat, Shofar should come first. Shofar should come first because Shofar technically is considered to be more tadir than Bris Milah. To this, the Rishonim say, but it's not true. Milah comes first. Despite the fact that Shofar should, because it's more tadir, Milah comes first. Why?
Because it's only once in your lifetime where Shofar is many?
No. The mitzvah of doing a Bris Milah can be done every day. It could be a mile. A parent could have many sons.
Okay, why do we say Shofar is?
Because it's consistent. It's consistent. You know it's coming every year. It's a chiyuv every single year. Bris Milah doesn't necessarily have to happen anytime. If people don't have a son or whatever, there's no Bris Milah. The consistency of Shofar makes it more tadir than the theoretical, numbers of Bris Milah, but it's only, it doesn't have to be. That's the assumption they're coming from. Asher Yatzar as tadir in terms of with that compared to other brachas. Yeah, so that can be part of the discussion over here. Yeah. I guess that will be part of the discussion. That's how these Rishonim are coming from. That Shofar is more tadir. But again, that's but despite that, Milah comes first. Why? So take a look at the Arzarua. So he says like this: if you have to give a Bris Milah to a baby on Rosh Hashanah, Amar Abba Mari, Rabbeinu Yehuda, Reb Klonimus. So he quotes his father, Rabbi Yehuda Reb Plonimus, that the halacha was lamul hanar lacha kriyas haTorah v'haftarah, that you do again like every day, you wait till after Shacharis, kriyas haTorah and so on, and then what? But then you do the Bris Milah kaidem shiasku b'shayfer before shayfer. Shayfer is more tadir. So he says like this, two reasons. He says two reasons. First of all, Kadei Shehei Bris Milah to Kufla Tkiya Shayfer. The reason why we do Bris Milah and then immediately after that Shayfer, Sheyizkar Lon HaKadosh Baruch Hu Bris Avram, V'Akedas Shel Yitzchak. Because Bris Milah is Avram Avinu, Shayfer is Akedas Yitzchak, it's Avram and then Yitzchak. So that's the order. Okay, interesting, fine. V'Aid. Second reason is going to be negate to us, V'Aid. The mitzvah min ha-mufcher hu lahak the milah b'hashkam. The answer is, the second reason is, because even though you write in Tadir universe, Shayfer is more Tadir than Milah, but there's a mitzvah when it comes to Milah to do it quickly. Mishum zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs. Mishum zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs. And says and he goes on. Ve'einachin la'achra ad gemar tefillah. And if you don't do Bris Milah before Shayfer, and you do Shayfer first, well, guess what? If you daven over here, Rosh Hashanah, you're only going to have the Bris Milah at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which is way late in the day. And you're going to wait to do Milah till after davening. The Rav Plam Gemar Tefillah, it's already 8 hours into the day. It's a long davening. And if you push off Milah so much, near it, the misses Milah b'zuyah. It gives Milah a bad reputation. It sounds like as if you're really not so interested in doing it because it's a little bit cruel to the baby. So therefore, it's inappropriate to push it off that long. Again, let's analyze this for a second. For the first thing, this first logic he gave is that Avram Yitzchak, fine, that's very nice. We're not talking about that now. But the second thing, he says, Milah should come first. Why? It's the reason Magdim LaMitzvahs. 1 second. It's the reason LaMitzvahs. Shayfer is also the reason LaMitzvahs. There's all these mitzvahs. How can you use reason Magdim LaMitzvahs as a reason to do Milah first over Shayfer? Shayfer also can claim reason Magdim LaMitzvahs. And then he goes into this other thing. But you're going to push Milah so far into the day, it doesn't look good to Milah. The answer is, what the Arzaru is telling us is the same thing as Meiri. It's true. Shayfer, there's an in of Zrizis by Shayfer. But the in of Zrizis by Milah is altogether something different, as we've been saying. The Zrizis of Shayfer is a Milah in you. But the Zrizis of Milah, it's not just about you. You want to avoid giving Milah a bad reputation. And so says the Meiri, says the Arzarua, again, same idea as the Meiri, what are your options over here? Your options are do Milah first, fine, or do Milah after Shayfer. By the time you do Milah after Shayfer, it's already so late that it's going to have that bad reputation, and now you have something deficient in the Milah. So therefore, says the Meiri, says the Arzarua, therefore Zrizim Magdim Mitzvahs obligates you to do Milah first. Why? Because the Zrizis over here is trying to, we're trying to avoid an inherent chesaron that could happen in the Bris Milah if you push it off. Again, just like that's the concept that we saw from the Meiri, that Zrizim Magdim Mitzvahs is a mile in Bris Milah. Why? Because what's the alternative? To push it off so long, that's going to give a bad name to Bris Milah. So that's what the Arzaru is saying over here. Right, mitzvah min ha-mufcher. It's a mitzvah min ha-mufcher to do it early. Right, exactly. And that's why he doesn't just stop there. He doesn't just want, okay, so stop there. No. Because he's trying to explain. Why is it a mitzvah min ha-mufcher? Why is it better for Milah to be bizrizis? Well, the answer is because if you don't do it bizrizis, then that's going to be giving a bad reputation to Milah. And so this is the Nakud over here. That's why he has to go on to explain. And what's the alternative? To do it after Shayfer, 8 hours later. That's definitely way too long. It's going to give this bad impression about that you're avoiding Bris Milah for some reason. And so that's what's going on over here. Again, so this is what we have so far. Number one, again, just to be misader the thoughts. Again, we have this. Again, the Gemara picks Bris Milah, the Rambam. We have this inyan that Bris Milah, this reason the mitzvah is something special in Bris Milah itself. It's not just about you, but the mitzvah of Milah itself. And then we had the Meiri plus the Arzarua explain to us a little bit more clearly what the issue is. And the way they explain is, again, as I said, it's not so much they're painting a picture that there's a Milah if you do Bris Milah early. But the issue is if you don't do it early, and especially if you do it very, very late, there's a negativity that might be put on the Bris Milah. And that's that negativity you're trying to avoid. So there's always two separate things in Yiddishkeit, right? There's positive and then there's negative. So the way the Meir and the Arzur are explaining this connection between Bris Milah and Zrizas, it's more of about avoiding a negative. That's the way they're doing. There's a negative that will come in if it's pushed off very late, and that's what you want to avoid. Other mitzvahs don't have that. If you push off other mitzvahs, it doesn't create a negativity in the mitzvah. Again, it says something about you, but it doesn't say anything about the mitzvah. So when it comes to, again, that's how the Meir and the Arzur are doing it. That's why, again, just to explain, that's why the Arzurua is stressing the fact that it's not so much that you should do it early, because you can't do it so late. Because if you do it so late, again, it creates this negativity and negative impression of Bris Milah, and that's what you're trying to avoid. Okay. So all this is fine in the Meir and the Arzurua. So far, so good. You guys, everything's good? Okay. The problem is, maybe this is not the biggest kash in the world, but to me, it doesn't sound like this in the Rambam. The Rambam that we started, which was the sheet that we began with to really indicate and to drive home that Zrizis is connected to Bris Milah intimately and deeply, to me, it doesn't just sound like the point is not to do it late and to avoid some negative, connotation that might come up with Bris Milah if you don't do it early. The language to me in the Rambam is indicating something positive. Again, in Marmukah number 4, the Rambam said, again, the whole day can be done for Bris Milah, afal pikim, but nevertheless, mitzvah lahaktim b'tchilas hayom. He didn't say there's a mitzvah to not do it late, or the Rambam could have said you shouldn't. The mitzvah is all, you could do it all day long, but don't do it late. There's a reason we're doing mitzvahs. He doesn't say that. See, if this was the Arzurua and the Meiri talking, I don't think they would have said those words of do it early. Or if you're going to say that, at least drive home the point, like the Meiri does, of explaining why. It's not so much about early. It's not so much early. It's about avoiding a negative connotation, which is going to come up if you do it late. The Rambam, again, I'm not saying it's the biggest kash in the world, but to me, the Rambam is indicating that it's not just a negativity that would come in if you don't do it b'zrizis. It sounds like there's a Milah be'etzem, that there's a positivity with Bris Milah in particular when you do it early. And so to me, that's still the question, why? So again, we've clarified that there's a negativity that'll happen if you don't do it early, and you want to avoid that, I get it. But in the Rambam, again, as I said, it sounds to me that there's something more positive about doing it early and not just avoiding a negative of not doing it late. What is that positive in you? What is so positive about the mitzvah when it's done early? Follow? Okay, so it's like this. Take a look at Marmukah number 7. To answer that question, I'll ask you another question. So the Maram Chalava is one of the Rishonim. It's interesting. He's one of the Rishonim that I don't know if we have him on any other Masechta besides Pesachim. But on Masechta Pesachim Daf Daled Amud Aleph, the Maram Chalava records. Remember in the Marmukah number 2, we had that brisa that said. Well, let's read it together inside. Let's go back to Marmukah number 2, and we'll see how the Maram Chalava says on that. So again, we saw this already. Marmukah number 2. Again, the brisa says. Right? It says in Pasuk you could do the Bris Milah the 8th. You should do the Bris Milah the 8th day. The whole day is kosher to do Bris Milah. But you should do it early. How do I know the concept of Zviz Magdilim Mitzvahs? The Ashkemar Biker, because Avram Avinu did Akedah Yitzchak right away. Fine. That's simple. Take a look at Marmukah number 7. The Maram Chalava records a girsa of the Rif, that when the Rif recorded this brisa that we just read in Marmukah number 2 in an alternate way. Now, it happens to be, this is not the Rif that we have, but this is the Rif that the Maram Chalava quotes. It says the Maram Chalava like this, Harif Kasav. The Rif records the version of that brisa slightly different. It says, and these are the words, the Yashkem Avim Abayker, that the brisa starts off quoting the pasuk in Akedah Yitzchak. Avram Avinu wakes up in the morning to do Akedah Yitzchak, and asks the brisa, "V'afa pisha kol hayom kosher l'milah." You could do a bris milah all day. Answers the brisa, "Zriz magdim l'mitzvos." That's how the brisa is recorded in this version of the Rif. So again, the words are, it says in pasuk, Avram wakes up in the morning to do Akedah Yitzchak. Asks the brisa, the whole day you could do a bris milah. So why is he going so early? The answer is Zriz magdim l'mitzvos. Says the Maram Chalava, "Ef shalahomai." I can't swallow such a girsa. It doesn't make any sense. B'shum panim, the high crow lav gabi milu. Avram Avinu wasn't doing bris milah; he was doing Akedah Yitzchak. Again, what's the brisa? Avram Avinu wakes up to do Akedah Yitzchak. Asks the brisa, you could do bris milah the whole day. What are you talking about? I'm doing Akedah Yitzchak. What are you bringing bris milah over here? It doesn't make any sense. High crow lav gabi milu.
Why is it kasha on the Rif? Kasha on the Gemara new one?
No, because the Gemara that we have The Gemara is talking about Bris Milah, and it mentions the idea that even though it's kosher the whole day, he's using the mitzvahs. How do I know the concept of using the mitzvahs? Akedas Yitzchak. But to quote first the pasuk of Akedas Yitzchak and ask, the whole day is kosher for Bris Milah, we're not talking about, the pasuk is not talking about Bris Milah, it's talking about Akedas Yitzchak. So says the Maram Chalava, such a girsa yav shalom. I can't tolerate such a thing with shumpanim. The Haikra Lav Gavimilu. The pasuk is not talking about Bris Milah, it's talking about it. The Shema Kais V'Yasor Shivshar girsa. So it must be some mistake. The Sefer wrote it wrong. It's incorrect. The problem is this is a girsa. Again, we don't have it in our Gemara in the Riv, but this is a girsa that's quoted by many Rishonim. Now they all raise the same issue. Don't get me wrong, but Lamaisa, this is not the. If it was a mistake by some Sefer. Okay, the Maram Chalava's Gemara was the Sefer he had, whatever. We're talking about, spanning countries and generations, that this was a girsa in the Rif. So what's going on over here? What is a Akedas Yitzchak? Again, that's such a peladika thing to say. Avraham Avinu gets to do a Akedas Yitzchak, ask the Brisa, but you can do a Milah all day long. As if Avraham Avinu is doing Bris Milah. Okay, so take a look at this. Marmok number 8. So now we're going to move into Pnimius, but seamless transition. Yeah? So Marmok number 8. So the Medrash Rabbah, beginning of our parsha. Rabbi Yitzchak Pasach. Rabbi Yitzchak began talking about Parshas V'yer in the following way. Mizbech Adama Tasli. It says in Pasach, you should make for yourself, make for me a Mizbech made of earth. Rabbi Yitzchak. Ma imzeh shabana Mizbech l'shmi. Ma a person who just builds an altar for Hashem and sacrifices an animal. Hashem says, I'm going to come and bless you, right? Avram Shemol Atzim L'shmi Alachas Kama V'Kama. So Avram Avinu, who gives himself a Bris Milah, certainly I'm going to come and bless him. Reb Levi Pasach, so in other words, again, what's Rabbi Yitzchak saying? That if a person brings a carbon in so chashiv, then Alachas Kama V'Kama, Bris Milah. And he goes and he continues. Reb Levi Pasach, Reb Levi said a similar thing. It's Shar V'ayel L'shlamim L'zbayich L'fnei Hashem. The pasuk says you should bring animals to sacrifice before Hashem. Omar. So Reb Levi said, if a person just sacrifices an animal for Hashem's sake, that's enough for Hashem to give him blessing. So Avram Shemol Atzim Lachas Kama V'Kama. And certainly if a person does Bris Milah, all the more so. See what the Medrash is doing over here. The Medrash is not just equating; it's making a kal v'chomer that a Bris Milah is even greater than a carbon. Now that's an interesting tzushtel. I mean, there's a lot of mitzvahs that take mesiras nefesh, a lot of mitzvahs that take self-sacrifice. The brisa is again, it's saying that if karbanis have such an unbelievable effect, then Bris Milah is kama v'kama. Says the Chassam Sofer.
Not even the carbon, it's
just making the mizbech, and the next thing bringing animals, right? So says the Chassam Sofer, say many achronim. You see from this brayso, I'll show you an example in halacha l'mais of this. That the way to think of a Bris Milah is not just like any other mitzvah. We have many mitzvahs, so you have to shake lulav, shayfer, you do a Bris Milah. No. The inyan of Milah is that you are sacrificing, whether if it's the son or if it's yourself, the person that's being gemalt is being sacrificed for their Rebbeinu Shalom. And really, what should be happening? The whole body. That's what a carbon is. Carbon oil. The Rebbeinu Shalom, its compassion doesn't obligate that. And what he says, a Bris Milah. But the Bris Milah is not just a ma'aseh mitzvah that you do. It's a way of indicating that the entirety of the person has now been sacrificed for the Rebbeinu Shalom. The person is a carbon. The person is a carbon. Show you right. Marmok number 9. The Shulchan Aruch in Hilchas Milah says the following thing. It's in Siman Kuf Samachin Yeridei. It says the Shulchan Aruch. Avi haben oimid ala moil. It's halacha. It's not just something that the moilim are makbid on. The father of the baby that's having the Bris Milah, the father has to stand next to the moil. He's not doing there's a moil there, but the father has to stand next to him. To make it clear that the moil is the one that's doing it on behalf of the father. So it says the Shulchan Aruch, the father, if he's somewhere in the crowd, it's not clear that the moil is doing it on his behalf. So the moil should be doing it on behalf of the father. Let the father stand right there. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. Comes the Vilna Gaon and says, I agree with the halacha that the father should stand there, but it's much more significant than just everyone should know that the moil is doing it for him. Much more. Says the Vilna Gaon, Shahamila hu dogmas karban. The reason why the father has to stand by the moil is not just that everyone should know that he's the guy, he's the father, to give him a mazel tov. Says the Gaon, because what is Bris Milah? A Bris Milah is a carbon. Because the baby that's being gemalt is being sacrificed to the Rebbeinu Shalom as a carbon. Kamash Amr Medrash Rabbah Parshas Emor. And the Vilna Gaon quotes to a different Medrash in Parshas Emor. It's in the brackets over here. Mishpat Adam and Mishpat Behema Shava. Says the Medrash, a human being, the halachas for a human being and the halachas for an animal are similar. Adam will be Yom HaShmini Yimol. A human being on the 8th day has a Bris Milah. Ubehema Yom HaShini V'Hola. And by an animal also, from 8 days and on, it can be sacrificed as a carbon. Says the Medrash again, equating the two. An animal can be sacrificed 8 days and on, so a human being also has a Bris Milah 8 days and on. What shaykhis? Says the Vilna Gaon, again this point, Bris Milah is not just a Bris Milah is the person is being sacrificed to Hashem, he is becoming a carbon. Says the Vilna Gaon, many other midrashim say the same thing. Therefore what? Says the Vilna Gaon, V'amir in Perak Dal the Tainis, and the Gemara says in Tainis, Heich Karbanis Shel Adam Karav, that the halach of Karbanis was that even if the kain is sacrificing your carbon for you, how should the carbon be sacrificed? You have to stand, there's a halach in Karbanis that the owner of the carbon has to stand with the kain as it's being sacrificed. So it says the Vilna Gaon, that's the same thing why the father has to stand by the mile. Not just to make sure that everyone knows that he's the father. That's the halach of Karbanis. You can't sacrifice your carbon unless you're there. It's the same thing over here. You can't sacrifice your son unless you're standing there. Sacrifice my son. Yeah, that's what you're doing by Bris Milah. That's what you're doing by Bris Milah. Okay, so there's a chiddush. There's a new idea of what Bris Milah is. Okay, but now that we have this in place, let's go back. The Rambam, again, as I said, I feel seems to indicate that Zrizus is a mile in Bris Milah itself. Like it's not just avoiding a negative, Chil Hashem or something by pushing it off as if you're not interested in Bris Milah. No. It's a mileage. Zrizus is a mile in Bris Milah. Why? Once we have this idea that the Bris Milah has been redefined, it's not a mitzvah stam. It's a way of sacrificing your entirety to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Then what is a carbon? And that's what Bris Milah is. What a carbon is that you're taking something physical, and that's all the Rishonim even talk about this. The Ramban. What a carbon is that you're taking something that's physical, chaymer, taking something that's physical matter. And it's not just sacrifice. You're not just destroying it. A carbon is not, I have this beautiful tablecloth, and I'm going to sacrifice it to Hashem. What could I do? I'm just going to destroy it for Hashem's sake. The point of the carbon is not destroying something for God's sake. The point is that you are uplifting something towards the Rebbeinu Shalom. Something that was physical is now being uplifted to become a spiritual entity, to become something that's connected above. Chazal say when it comes to the sacrifices in the Beis HaMikdash, what would happen? They would put a fire on the Mizbech, put the animal up, and the first Beis HaMikdash especially, a fire would come down and consume it. Why do you need that fire? A carbon is not about destroying something physical and see, I sacrificed something. No. It's about being makriv. The word makriv means karv, means to be close. You are offering something up. Something that was until now physical has now been raised to something to become defined as a spiritual entity. That's what a carbon is. That's what Bris Milah is. Before Bris Milah or without Bris Milah, what's happening is everyone has a neshama. The neshama is already spiritual. That's not the issue. The issue is what about your guf? The guf is physical. What a Bris Milah is that what was until now physical, which is your body, not just that particular part. It's the whole body, right? The whole thing is a carbon. The whole body of the Jew by a Bris Milah is now being uplifted to the status of neshama. That's what it is. Just like the animal is being uplifted to ruchnius by a carbon, the human being, the Jew, his guf, is now being nis'ala, being uplifted to a status of ruchnius, a status of neshama. That's what Bris Milah is. Now, what is one of the differences between spiritual and physical? It's an amazing thing. One of the qualities of that which is a big principle in the Maharal, many Sfarim, that the nature of physical is to be slow and lethargic. Slow and lethargic. The nature of spiritual is to be quick, bizrizis. It's the nature of one of the differences between physical and spiritual. For example, there's a Gemara in Brachas that talks about, it's an amazing thing, it talks about how fast certain malachim are. That Gavriel with one flap can go from one end of the universe to the other. And Michal, 2 flaps. And Nebuch, Eliyahu Hanavi, he has to take a train. You know what I'm saying? Eliyahu Hanavi has to take four flaps, whatever. He can do it. That's what we're talking about. It says the Maharsha and the Maharal. What Chazal are trying to say over there is that you want to determine something as having a more spiritual quality, see how fast it is. If the Zrizus is not just Zrizus is an indicator of ruchni. something that's more gashmi is automatically going to be slower. Eliyahu Hanavi is Gavaldik, but Lamaisa, compared to Malachim, he's a physical person. That was uplifted as a carbon, mamish, right? But Lamaisa, he started off as physical. He's not going to be as fast as a Malach. Speed is related to Ruchni. It's interesting. It says the Marmuk number 11. Look at the Mesil Sisharm. It's the Mesil Sisharm in the 6th paragraph. Vitira. Kitev ha'adam kaved ma'id. The nature of a person is to be heavy, to be slow. Ki afarias ha'chormias gas. Because the physicality of the body is thick and it weighs a person down. That's why a person naturally is not inclined necessarily to work hard and to put in a lot of effort. But a person that wants to enter into Avodas Hashem, and what is Avodas Hashem? Avodas Hashem means to give strength to the neshama over the guf, right? To uplift yourself, to become a carbon, to embrace the Bris Milah that we have. So that requires rizis. Zrizis is not just Tama Maila. Zrizis is an indicator that you're taka carbon, that you've been uplifted, that your body has been uplifted. So she is gaber negativa, vis gaber, vis daris, and so on. The Mesilas Yesharim continues on with that mode. So let's go back. So we had a Rambam that told us that the Maila of Zrizis is what? The Maila of Zrizis is a Maila in Bris Milah. And so we had the Meir and Arzarua explaining in their way that it's not so much that it's a Maila and Bris Milah, but there's a negativity that'll come if you're not Zaras. Because it'll give an indication that Bris Milah is cruel. So you want to avoid that. But now we're saying, no. There's taka a Maila in Bris Milah when it's done Bezrizis. Even if it's not just a matter of avoiding a negativity, there's a Maila when it's done Bezrizis. Why? Because what is Bris Milah? Bris Milah is that you have been defined, you have been completely sacrificed to Rebbeinu. You have been uplifted. Your body has been uplifted to the status of soul. The soul by a Bris Milah, what happens by a Bris Milah going on is that the soul is given sovereignty. The soul of a Jew is given dominance over the body, ad kedei kach, that the body to some degree is now considered part of the soul's universe. And what is a siman? What is an indicator? What's the difference between an organism that is more ruchani versus an organism that's more chaimer, that's more physical? Speed. Meila Zurizim, Magdim Mitzvahs, is a Maila Bris Milah. It's a Maila Bris Milah. Let's go back also to that Girsa of the Rif. Remember that Girsa of the Rif? It says in Pasuk Avraham Avinu is going to sacrifice Yitzchak Avinu, and it says he's doing it in the morning. Ask the Brisa, Bris Milah is kosher the whole day. Someone goes, what are you talking about? Bris Milah, sacrificing Akedah Yitzchak? All Akedah Yitzchak was Bris Milah 2.0. It was Bris Milah to its extreme. What Bris Milah usually says, it's as if you're doing, Avraham Avinu was told, actually do it. So every time you do a Bris Milah, what you're doing is sacrificing your entirety to God. But the Rebbeinu Shalom says, Ke'ilu. Baruch Hashem, right? But by Avraham Avinu, the Rebbeinu Shalom told Avraham Avinu, no. For you, it's not Ke'ilu. For you, it has to be the real deal. So when Avraham Avinu was going to do Akedah Yitzchak, what mitzvah was he fulfilling? He wasn't doing a new mitzvah that never existed before. In his mind, again, it didn't, obviously, he didn't actually sacrifice Yitzchak. But at that moment, what it meant to him at that time was that he was performing the mitzvah of Bris Milah in its fullest sense. So says the Brisa, that's what the Brisa is saying, Kipshutai. Avram Avinu wakes up in the morning, asks the Brisa, why in the morning? The whole day is kosher for Bris Milah. The answer is reason to do mitzvahs. That's the Brisa, it's Kipshutai.
That's why on the way of the kind of Yom Kippur,
it's Ruchni, exactly, same meaning. That's also why, even on a simple level, Chazal say, it says, Vahi achar dvar meila. Right, that after those words, Hashem said to Avraham Avinu, Akedah Yitzchak. What's after what conversation? So there's different interpretations. I think Rashi brings down that Yishmael was always had this thing against Yitzchak, that you had a bris when you were 8 days old. You didn't have a say in the matter. I had a bris when I was 13. So Yitzchak would always say it back to Yishmael. If the Rebbeinu Shalom told me today, though, to sacrifice my whole body, I go along with it. Okay, Vahi achar dvar meila. After that conversation, so Hashem says, okay, fine. Yitzchak's response to Yishmael is not just like another thing. So then if Hashem wanted me to be poor, I'd be poor. The answer is, what Bris Milah is an indication of my willingness, the fact that I am sacrificed. The rest is just commentary to actually do it. And so what Yitzchak is telling Yishmael is that you went through the act of Bris Milah. And that's true, don't get me wrong. It took Mesiras Nefesh, a 13-year-old kid. It's not an easy thing. But you're not looking at Bris Milah the way Bris Milah is supposed to be, that it's a way of being a carbon. I'm a carbon. It's true, it's like when I was only 8 days old, but if I needed to prove it today, I'd prove it today, and that's exactly what Akedat Yitzchak was. Let's go back to the very beginning. So we started with a question: why is Bris Milah associated with Moshe Rabeinu? Remember that? It's like 2 years ago, right? Moshe Rabeinu and Bris Milah was shaykhs, right? So again, the second letter of the Seres Dibros, the letter Nun. The Gemara says in Shabbos, the letter Nun is related to Moshe. Neman, he's a trusted person. The Kamarna said that Eliyahu Hanavi in full only comes to a bris, where in the bris there's a person with Nishmas Moshe. What does Moshe have to do with the bris? Take a look at Marmok number 12. So this is the Maral in Tiferes Yisrael in the 12th parak. Ki madregas Moshe nivda lagami min hachamim. It's a biggie cited by the Maral that what makes Moshe Rabeinu unique is not his brilliance, his wisdom, the chulu. What makes Moshe Rabeinu unique is that he was complete as to whatever degree it's possible for a human being. Moshe Rabeinu was completely spiritual. Ish Elokim. Every single, Moshe Rabeinu is the embodiment of what Bris Milah can look like. How far-reaching a Bris Milah can be to a person that his entire body is not just under the jurisdiction of neshama, but completely neshamatic. The prime example of how great that can happen to, that's Moshe Rabeinu. Even Eliyahu is not as great as that. Moshe Rabeinu is completely removed from physicality. Says Maral, this is well known. That's what makes Moshe Rabeinu unique. That's why he's nevuah with absolute transparency. His body didn't interrupt at all. His body wasn't a steerer to that. Moshe Rabeinu, like the Rambam says, could go into the Kadosh HaKadosh whenever he wanted. Moshe Rabeinu is b'chlal, if his physicality is completely bottled to his ruchnius. Moshe Rabeinu was a carbon. Moshe Rabeinu is everything that Milah is trying to get us to. Moshe Rabeinu was there. And I already talked about this at length in my Sefer Gvur Hashem. It's by the pasuk that Moshe is called Moshe because he was drawn from the water. It's a big call by the Maral that water is an element that's always connected to physicality. It's a big principle by the Maral that water doesn't fight. Water has no... Whatever you want to put in water, it's makabel. It doesn't have any of its own days. You understand? Like, obviously, it'll... if it's resting on ground that's tilted, it'll go. But you want to put a donkey in the water, so the Brooklyn Bridge, it's fine. Whatever you put in the water for that second, it takes upon that thing's shape. It doesn't have... This is the quality in the Maral that's always associated with chaymer, with physicality. It doesn't have its own. It's a slave. It's a slave to whatever you put in it. And that's why Moshe Rabeinu redeems us from slavery, because slavery is the epitome of what? Of physicality. That's what the Gemara says, that 10 measurements of laziness came to the world. Avadim took 9. Why are Avadim lazy? Because Avadim, chaymer, laziness, lack of zrizas, it's all the same thing. But Moshe Rabeinu is a zaris. Moshe Rabeinu is the embodiment of completely ruchani. His body is completely part of his neshama. It's all one entity. Moshe Rabeinu, that's why the letter Nun is associated with Moshe Rabeinu. The letter Nun, what does the word Nun mean? So Nun Neyama, the letter Nun means a fish. It means a fish. Moshe Rabeinu is connected to fish, and in Chazal, in the Zohar Kadosh, he's called the great fish of the sea. Paralleling Parai, was also called the Tinin HaGadol, the great serpent of the sea. Nun Sharibina, there's 50 gates of wisdom that Moshe Rabeinu could have had access to at the end of his life. He did have access. The letter Nun. What does fish have to do with anything when we're talking about? Fish, everything is created from something, right? So Adam and Chava were created from the earth, but we are not earth anymore. What's unique to fish is that where it comes from, which is water, it's still defined as water. The halach is, I mentioned this many times, the halach is that if you go to a mikveh and there's fish in the mikveh, the fish are not a chatzitza to the water. They're considered water. In other words, so you have this dynamic that everything of this world comes from its spiritual source. Everything has a shirish above, and from that shirish it descends and it materializes to this place. But the way to think of it without Bris Milah, a non-Moshe Rabeinu way of thinking, is that there's a root that it all comes from, but L'maisa, by the time it gets down here, it's completely something different. And now there's a conflict between Ruchnis and Gashmis. But the quality of fish means that it's still defined as where it comes from. It's still called water. Moshe Rabeinu is called the great fish of the sea, because the letter Nun, fish, Moshe Rabeinu, is this quality of that no matter how far it goes, no matter where it comes, Gashmis comes from Ruchnius, and guess what? And Gashmis is still called Ruchnius. It's Mamash Hainuach. It's one and the same. Moshe Rabeinu is therefore, again, that's this idea that Moshe Rabeinu is the embodiment of everything Bris Milah is about. That's the letter Nun. That's the letter Nun, and that's why Moshe Rabeinu is associated with Bris Milah, as we said. No, so no, like I mentioned last time, whenever you get the Pnimis of a mitzvah, you see that it's much more open-ended than just that particular moment. So every single time a person has any taiva, any Yetzirah to do something that the body wants to do, or that's from the kinetayv and cover, whatever category the body is drawing the person to, and they're mechazik themselves to listen to the neshama, that's fulfilling mitzvah Bris Milah. That is fulfilling. That is Bris Milah. That's the pnimis of Bris Milah. Is every time there's a hisgabrus, there's an overcoming of nisyanis of the body to listen to the neshama, or in a positive way to do physical things l'shem shemayim. That's Bris Milah. That's a kiyum of Bris Milah. That itself is a kiyum of Bris Milah. So we should be zeicha to not rely on the fact that our fathers and whatnot gave us a Bris Milah. We have a chiyuv to be kind of Bris Milah ourselves constantly, to again conquer our bodies with our neshama, to bring them together. They should all be working on the same page to eventually get us to become a merkava for Elikus, and to become a chariot to Hashem is not just enough for a neshama. A chariot for Hashem means a neshama and a guf together. That's the key of Bris Milah. No, we should be zeicha to mekayim this properly, but primis of chitzonius. V'yas kol tzedek v'her v'meinu amen. Shkayach everybody.